Like the tank changed the shape of the war overnight. Luckily, they were mostly on our side. Mostly.
Our boys in the church are overrun. We need to push through. Keep me iron. Keep going, driver! That's our flying boys up there! Keep your eyes on the ground, son. They're moving in from the trenches. We'll chase sprint all the way back to Berlin. Hard for our lads. Move up with the rest of the armor. Stay focused, men. Push on, damn it. We're almost through. Fire at anything that moves. We're gonna make it. Shit! Incoming!
Instead of adventure, we found fear. And in war, the only true equalizer.
All right, welcome back. We're here with unit number 9 out of 14 for the year. Now, the big deal here is this is the Spanish-American War up until World War I. Now, some of you might be like, wow, I've never heard of the Spanish-American War. Well, here's the information that you need to know. The main thing is, what is the Spanish-American War? So we, the United States, are trying to help Cuba gain independence from Spain. You might think, why do we care? Well, Cuba is very close to us, roughly 90 miles away. So we want to have them as trade partners. Remember, economics, jobs, trade, and money. There are some humanitarian reasons as well, but the main thing is they're close to us. We can deal with them in terms of business. The main thing that's really important here is that because of the Spanish-American War, this is when the United States is recognized as a world power. We, for as long as all of us here have been alive, we've been one of the most powerful nations in the world, if not the most powerful. But that wasn't always the case. There was always the issue of isolationism. We did not necessarily get involved with other people's business. So the war began because Cuba, a Spanish colony, wanted to be independent. Cubans were fighting for their freedom from Spain. So because of Cuba's proximity to the United States, again, 90 miles, the United States gets involved for economic reasons mostly, but also humanitarian reasons, as I mentioned before. Now, the big thing that you need to know is the sinking of the USS Maine, which is a battleship, is what instigates people saying, remember the Maine, meaning the belief was that the Maine was sunk by the Spanish or some type of terrorist attack. Now, the interesting thing is now, in hindsight, that type of battleship had issues with its boilers, and a lot of people believe that it was a totally 100% accident, which is interesting because this influences us to go to war, and in hindsight, it may have been just something that would have occurred anyway. So ultimately, for 10 weeks, battles occurred in Cuba and in the Philippines, which was also a Spanish territory. The United States wins and Spain loses its power over the colonies. As a result, we gain territory here in the United States. For example, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines all become territories of the United States. This showed the rest of the world that the United States was becoming very powerful, and as we're going to see in the future, we make a huge difference in both World War I and World War II. So we just talked about how, because of the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico is annexed by the United States, which is part of Latin America. The United States asserts its right to intervene in Cuban affairs, but here's a couple new things. First, the Panama Canal and Theodore Roosevelt. The United States encouraged Panama's independence from Colombia. The parties negotiated a treaty to build the canal. And you might say, what's the big deal? Well, this is a shortcut. So instead of, for example, let's say a ship needs to travel from New York to San Francisco. Instead of having to go all the way around the tip of South America, it can now cut halfway through, cutting the distance by, long time, money, etc. Then last, we have the Roosevelt Corollary. This is a vocabulary word. So when you see this, remember, the Monroe Doctrine basically warns people in the Eastern Hemisphere not to mess with us over here in the Western Hemisphere. So it's not something that's newly created. Theodore Roosevelt is reaffirming a policy that's already there. So when you see the Roosevelt Corollary, again, he's just reaffirming the Monroe Doctrine. All right, so Asia and the Pacific. So first off, Hawaii. This is a really interesting story. The United States deposed Hawaii's monarchy. So why do we have interest in Hawaii? Obviously money. They have sandalwood, which is extremely valuable in China, but the big thing is sugar and pineapples. So what happens is a guy named Stanford B. Dole, yes, Dole Pineapples, he staged a coup against the Queen. And ultimately, Hawaii becomes the 50th state of the United States. And all this happens because of money, because of the economics, in particular pineapples and sugar, but also don't forget sandalwood. You're not going to be tested on that, but that's just to make this a little bit more interesting because I get it. This is not the most exciting, but guess what? The next unit will be. But anyway, then we have the Philippines and Guam. They're annexed after the Spanish-American War. And then last, we have what's called the open door policy. Urged all foreigners in China to obey Chinese law and observe fair competition. So China basically is divided up into these different areas. And in these areas, different countries are trading and they're not giving exclusive rights to other countries. So what the United States is asking is that all of China be open to everyone to ensure economic fair play. So last, as part of the Spanish-American War, we have the Philippines and also racial conflict. African-American soldiers and sailors eagerly enlisted to fight, but they were kept in segregated units. For example, only African-Americans served in a unit. They did not serve with other races. So the long fight against the Filipinos after the American arrival was often interpreted in the United States as a struggle between white and colored peoples. So again, as we've talked about previously, during this time period, the racial struggles in America are still going strong. All right, so that brings us to World War I. So this is a little bit different because when we get to World War II, America was attacked. I'm sure you've all heard of Pearl Harbor. But World War I, America is not directly attacked. We're basically trying to help Great Britain and France, who are our allies. But what happens is World War I begins in Europe when Germany and Austria-Hungary went to war with Britain, France, and Russia. For 3 years, America maintained neutrality due to popular support for isolationism. Again, isolationism. We're trying not to get involved in the wars of the world or other, things going on. We're trying to keep to ourselves. The decision to enter the war was a result of continuing German submarine warfare, which we viewed that as violating the freedom of the seas and the American ties to Great Britain in particular. So we're trying to help them out the best that we can. So some of the things you need to know is more than 350,000 African Americans fought for the Allied forces, but they are often restricted to support roles, but sometimes on the front lines. Immigration from Europe stopped, and factories in the North needed laborers. Americans wanted to make the world safe for democracy. That is a quote from Woodrow Wilson. And finally, American military resources of soldiers and war materials tipped the balance of the war and led to Germany's defeat. Now, even though America was not in the war from the beginning, what it's saying here about our resources, again, I mentioned this previously, America is so big, the whole country is as big as all of Europe, and we have just so many natural resources. When we enter the war, we have people, we have iron, we're able to make weapons faster than anyone else can do it. So this turns the tide of the war. So we really made a difference in finally ending this war. So United States President Woodrow Wilson, he has a plan to eliminate the causes of the war, which are called the 14 points. Lucky for you, you only need to know 3 of them. So be prepared to identify these on any type of SOL or CSA, but you need to understand 3 of the 14 points are self-determination, freedom of the seas, and the League of Nations. So Woodrow Wilson believes in the League of Nations, but as you're going to see in a moment, that doesn't really come through. So the Treaty of Versailles officially ends the war, but one of the key things here is the French and English insist on the severe punishment of Germany. This is going to be a huge deal because Germany is going to end up rising again before World War II, and part of this severe punishment plays a huge role. Also, a League of Nations was created. National boundaries are redrawn, creating many new nations. This is something that confuses people because, again, if you look at a map before World War I and after World War I, there's new countries, or countries change their names subtly, and that is confusing. But there's also what's called a mandate system, which was established in the Middle East. The mandate system was a way to divide up territories held by Germany after the war. It led to more conflict, though, so that's another issue. Now, I mentioned that the League of Nations became an issue for the United States. Ultimately, senators, they objected because they didn't want U.S. foreign policy being made by international organizations rather than United States leaders. The United States Senate's failure to approve the Treaty of Versailles led to the United States not joining the League of Nations. So I mentioned countries changing before and after World War I. So if you look to the left, that's the layout basically before World War I. And you can see I put 4 different colored stars just to give you an example. So if you look at the red star, you have Austria-Hungary. Then if you look on the right side, you see now you have Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. If you look at the yellow star, you have basically Germany. But if you look to the right, that's East Prussia, which was old Germany. And you have below that Poland. And if you look at the purple, you have Serbia on the left, and over on the right, you have Yugoslavia. And then last, you have the blue star, which is just part of Russia, but that becomes Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So again, for those of you who don't like geography, that's really confusing. But again, none of that's really going to be on a test, but it's more or less to help you understand when you hear these changing terms in the future. All right, so hope you enjoyed the video. Again, next one's going to be a lot more fun. We're going to be talking about prohibition, gangsters, things like that, as well as the Great Depression. Anyway, see you next time. Good luck on any test you might have.